to go down Sunday night so that I'm at home and rested well before. I don't know yet, and if you can kind of hang in there until I have a sense of that. If I can stay Sunday evening, that's when we would do the interviews. And we would do them at the Taji House or here in the temple. And I just don't know yet. Okay. Cultivate the inner vision. The other one is iffy. Okay, so patience. For bodhisattvas who desire a wealth of virtue, all harm is like a precious treasure. Therefore, without hostility, be patient with everyone. This is the way of a bodhisattva. What do you think that means? All harm is like a precious treasure. And how does that relate to accumulating a wealth of virtue? Analytic mind here, quite helpful. O faithful attendant, master of analytic mind. A wealth of virtue means you've accumulated merit, that your love has increased greatly, your great empty love. And we accumulate that on the basis of, that's the wealth of virtue, on the basis of practicing acts of virtue, meaning acts of good. And it's not just acts, to beings. Yeah? So, when a harm doer comes our way, whether it's a mosquito or somebody stealing from us, or somebody who wants to really violate our body, or someone who wants to kill us, or somebody that's dear to us, when a harm doer comes our way, think about patience, think about virtuous mind that wants the good. How do we react in a situation like that? You don't hate. You refrain from hating. You refrain from desiring harm to that one who desires harm for you. Again, it's a non-doing. It's a restraint of ill action. That's patience too. There's nothing, I haven't read all the sutras. I've read very few of the sutras, actually. I've read a fair amount of Dharma, but it's all been in English, so I haven't read the classic texts in their own language and so on. So I'm relatively uneducated as a Dharma practitioner, as a student. But in what I have read, and I have read wonderful Dharma, just wonderful Dharma, I have never seen anything that said, you must let somebody harm you. I have read stories about great masters who have allowed harm to occur to them for the benefit of others. But that's not an injunction. That's an example of how one great bodhisattva or more chose to relate to the potential or actuality of harm by practicing the patience of non-reaction and non-resistance. But I've never read anything that says you have to. Even in the ethics teaching here, taking life, for example, especially knowingly and with intent, motivated by self-interest and afflictive emotions, that's a negative action. don't hate. Refrain from hating. And anger is hatred. Don't make any mistake about that. Anger is not just sort of a mild annoyance. It's in the same basket that hatred is in. So, if someone threatens you with harm or harms you, don't retaliate, don't hate, but it doesn't mean you can't defend yourself. There's an expression that some of us found very enlivening at one point. The expression is wimp compassion, or idiot compassion. That's not what a bodhisattva is about. A bodhisattva is not a doormat unless the bodhisattva chooses to be a doormat. And a doormat is negative when it's taken out of an unconsciousness, but it can be a very positive thing. Maybe someone needs a doormat in order to get across something. Then you can lie down and be a doormat. Isn't there a beautiful song about that? Bridge over troubled waters? And Shantideva, his commitment as a great bodhisattva was to be a bridge for everyone who needs a crossing, a ship for everyone who needs to cross the oceans, a body for those who need bodies. But that's not wimp compassion, that's compassion. And please tell me, somebody who was listening carefully, why I'm talking about that? I've lost my train of thought here. I got enchanted by bodhisattva activity and lost my train of thought.
You're on number 27.
Yeah, we're on 27, but there was I started with something, but anyway. So it's really easy to be patient with those who accord with us. Those who respect us and treat us kindly, and those who make our way easy. It's so easy to be patient with them. And when our world is very orderly and sweet and nicely decorated and very comfortable because of the kindness of others, it's very easy to be patient. It's also easy to be impatient in those situations, but it's much easier to be patient with those people who are being very helpful to us. That gets tested in old age or infirmity when one is dependent on others. It's very easy to be impatient with those who are trying to help you when you can no longer doing what you're used to being able to do, and you're very impatient with others about that. So old people are often very impatient, and their caregivers become very impatient with them, and so a situation which could be characterized by great mutual tenderness and appreciation and gratitude often becomes really painful for both. Some of you have been caregivers for others, and it can be very challenging. But these kinds of situations that tax our patience, we really need these. We need these very difficult people, and we need these difficult circumstances, because otherwise how are we going to develop patience? We're not going to be developing patience if everything goes our way. We'll be developing something unpleasant. And we're very fortunate here in relative reality, because this relative reality existence that we're in is helpfully providing many opportunities for us to practice patience. Very many opportunities. But Tokme Zangpo teaches very clearly that you can't, and the commentaries that I've studied on these verses also talk about patience being, it's kind of like a pivotal training for bodhisattva activity or bodhisattva development, because you can't accomplish anything worth accomplishing if you don't have patience. Even the span of time between the idea and its its expression or its accomplishment, you have to be patient as your good idea comes to fruition. Say you have the idea you'll paint a painting. Well, a great deal of patience is required to paint a painting and bring that original impulse into expression. Many a lovely gesture on my canvases has been somewhat interrupted by my getting in there before the paint was quite dry. So anything worth doing is going to require patience. And certainly accomplishing the liberation of all beings from suffering is going to require a little patience. Steady effort and patience. So you can't do anything worth doing if you're an impatient being. You'll mess it up. Many a souffle has fallen. Not, however, that I have ever in my life baked a souffle. Not ever. But I've seen a few fallen ones. So the kinds of patience, this is the taxonomic brilliance of the Buddha Dharma, yes? Now, how many kinds of patience shall we focus on here? So, I want to read you a paragraph, though, about patience. Patience can be a stern taskmaster, requiring us to take genuine responsibility for our minds and actions. Patience restrains self-interested, self-righteous hostility and anger in reaction to apparent attack or insult. That self-denial is ascetic, even astringent. And patience can be austere, requiring of us a strict accounting of the actual condition of our minds, laying bare the burning embers of resentment and anger. In the very instant we're incensed, heated up by them, poised and impelled to act. What a teacher is patience. What a patient Lama. Stern, strict, demanding, patience is also the kindest of teachers, like a mother holding us very tightly in her arms, constraining us when we would rail and flail, with her wisdom and compassion taming our reckless minds and words and actions. Slowly and steadily, Lama patience allows us to taste the sweetness of our taming. Impatience is a form of anger. And we don't often acknowledge that or really pay close attention to it, but it is. It's wanting people to be different than they are. It's wanting circumstances to be different than they are. It's judging angrily and negatively that condition or that action or that experience that we're having and wanting it to be other than it is. And that's why the teaching here is about practicing patience without hostility. And, we were laughing yesterday, I think it was, about that sometimes when we're practicing patience at someone instead of with someone, yes? And that's a very good example of the hostility component of patience. It's like, you take your time. Take your time, no hurry. Put on some mascara. Sure, you look wonderful. You should definitely tune up the engine of the boat before we go to the movies. Okay, so the three kinds of patience in the Dharma that are spoken of here, that Takmi Zanpo will address, are also three methods for its practice. So the kind of patience and its practice are a union. Patience as forbearance, meaning non-retaliation, not hitting back, not hurting back, not talking back, not spitting back, non-retaliation. Somebody wants to hurt you, okay? You don't have to lie down and let them walk all over you, but you can also restrain your reaction of anger and hostility. Just forbear. And that in itself is a remarkable power of your own mind to recognize the desire to hurt back and the willingness not to and the ability not to. That's a great freedom in that. The ultimate precious treasure is bodhicitta, relying upon the harm doer toward whom we experience angry impatience arising. We lift our bodhicitta in the moment of testing. Mostly we're speaking about impatience with other humans or other beings, but circumstances and situations also provoke our impatience quite often. And it may not be about specific people or other beings. We may rail against fate. We may be consumed by an impatient, angry refusal of a life circumstance or experience that offends us or harms us or makes us frightened or helpless. For example, in the world of people who have experienced cancer, it's very familiar, the thought, why me? It often comes with the diagnosis, why me? More than with Parkinson's or ALS or cancer for some reason seems to provoke that kind of reaction. So why me? And some people will say, well, why not me? Why not? But the why me is very common, and it's got a double negative implication. One is it's a refutation of your own karmic responsibility. Not that you gave yourself cancer, that's not what karma is, but if you have the karma to have an illness and you want to refute that, by all means, do everything to heal yourself. Do everything to get well. And if you're not able to get well after having done absolutely everything you can, really, out of generosity with life and generosity with those who love you and your own desire to continue, you do absolutely everything you can to get well. And if you're not able to, then you die generously, dedicating your death for the benefit of all, with gratitude and love. But why me is a refutation of your part in the creation of whatever conditions obtain in your life. And so that's, in a sense, a refutation of karmic responsibility, and that doesn't get you anywhere in terms of understanding. But it also is quite a compromising of your bodhicitta, because the corollary of why me is rather have it be someone else. We don't usually think of that. Why me? I don't want to have this cancer is not usually accompanied by, except for people who are awake to love and compassion in a very broad way, it's not usually accompanied by, and I don't want anybody else to have it either. It usually just stops with why me? I don't want this. I don't want this in my life. But the why me specifically suggests that it might be someone else. And so that's kind of comically sad that you would think in the moment of your great challenge, you would think, oh, maybe that one could do it instead of me. I don't think any of us would really consciously wish that, but there's an implication there in the why me, yes? So even the situation that calls for patient acceptance and working with as a way of perfecting your own intentions for the benefit of all, perfect patience long enough to not immediately to substitute in this mechanical way we spoke of earlier, if it's necessary to do it mechanically rather than having it spontaneously arise in your mind, to think, I wish and desire and aspire that all beings be free of suffering, whether of illness or injury or just of confusion. That I wish that all beings be freed from this kind of suffering. Your load lightens so quickly when you have that thought, so quickly. Your suffering becomes so easy to bear when you think, I offer this for the relief of others. It's a tonglen. It's an exchange of self for other. That form of patience. Yeah, I offer this moment of my trial for the release of others. This is the core Bodhisattva practice, this exchange. It comes up in every aspect of our training. Yeah? With me? Endurance is the second kind of patience. It's simply accepting life's requirements and the requirements of our situations and relationships, even the requirements of our healing physically and mentally and emotionally, that we endure rather than try to turn it over to someone else for them to suffer instead of us, or to give up. To give up. Our learning is in experiencing what arises for us on the path of life, because we have created the conditions and the causes for that to happen. Remember Rinpoche saying, you will never, ever experience anything in this or any lifetime for which you have not created the cause. So we endure when we can't do anything creative to change it, that's not harmful, but that's beneficial. We endure. There's in the stupa here, there are the sayings of the 7 Buddhas of this fortunate eon. I think they're still on the stupa walls. I haven't been there for a while. And one of them is, patience is perfect endurance. Patience is perfect endurance. When I first read that one, I thought, well, that's not very inspiring. That's kind of boring. That seems so kind of mundane. Patience is perfect endurance. And that was before I broke my hip. And before I started really looking at what patience is in the small moments of life and how quickly I lost it, and how self-righteous I felt about it, and how unwilling I was to endure other people's stupidity. So how willing I was to let them endure mine. Patience is perfect endurance. Endurance is supported and nourished by remembering the simple facticity of impermanence and interdependence, and the truth of emptiness to which they point. Everything changes, comes and goes, including what is hard to bear. So there's one wonderful teaching about patience. So I don't remember the circumstance in the teaching story, but I think that some man was with his lama, and the lama was talking with the man about the man's desire to kill somebody for something he had wronged him by. And the lama just said, don't bother to kill him, he's going to die anyway. The third patience is called courage. Courage to live in a body. It's so not easy to live in a body. to face and master what is difficult, painful, and frightening in your life, to participate in the world which is not in your control, to be honest and sincere, to be humble, to be kind, without regard to circumstance or outcome, and for the Bodhisattva who inspires to liberate all beings from ignorance, courage to approach the vast, profound truth of emptiness. Thinking of patience and as courage is for me very inspiring, because part of the courage involved in practicing patience in our lives in this world is the courage to bear with, literally to be with our own insufficiencies and inadequacies, our own failings of good intention, our own derelictions of compassion and love, to bear with our apparent imperfection until we actually recognize the intrinsic perfection that we are. It's to bear with what appears to be as we ripen our capacity to be with what is. And then diligence. Diligence. This appeals to the puritanical element of the American psyche, to be told that we must practice diligence. However, I have a different view of diligence, and so does the Dharma. I get it from the Dharma. Enthusiasm. Instead of dogged diligence, this kind of arid, dry, painful forcing of oneself to keep on it, whatever it is that you're on. Joyous effort. Enthusiasm. Enthusiasm for what is important. But in order to have enthusiasm for what is important, you have to know what's important. Again, inner discernment, yes? Having a real capacity to recognize in your own mind's continuum, in your own sense of the purpose of your lifetime, what is important and what is not. And to enthusiastically bend your efforts to what is important. Not dutifully, doggedly, dryly, but wildly, abundantly, outrageously, enthusiastically, ecstatically lose yourself in your joy of devoting yourself to what really is in the core of your heart, your knowledge of what really matters. In the core of your core. Devote your life to that. And then who cares what happens? If your joyous effort has been bent for a lifetime toward what is of benefit for all beings, and you don't somehow succeed in attaining the E-word, enlightenment, what are the chances that by the end of your life you will have become a much more profound person, a much kinder person, a much more loving, compassionate, and courageous person? You know? So there's this wonderful expression. Failing that, so you have, what? I thought perhaps you had a scorpion Oh, no, it's a cell phone. Scorpion under control. Another word for diligence is enthusiasm, for what's important. Whatever your spiritual intention, if you don't place that first in your heart, your enthusiasm may seem to rise up one day and flag the next. Yeah, it's called momentary enthusiasm. Joyful effort easily drawn to more immediate and immediately gratifying pursuits than liberating all beings. Here's where patience and enthusiasm marry each other for good. When our wholehearted aspiration as bodhisattvas articulates through all our activities of body, speech, and mind, diligence and enthusiasm are well and truly described as joyful effort. We are truly yoked to the authentic purpose that animates us. Heart over the fence. In some circumstances and conditions, it may be that the only practice you can offer is your desire that all beings be free from suffering. Say you're in the extreme of illness, perhaps in very near death and really suffering. Some suffering physically is uncontrollable. And the intention that all beings be freed of that particular kind of suffering and of all suffering, that intention, to articulate that in the middle of your extreme suffering, your anguish, your bodily pain, your mental torment, frees you in that instant from the self-grasping that is the source of all of our suffering in the mind. Yeah? You're immediately freed from it. It may come back again as the next spasm of pain hits, but then I offer this for the liberation of all. And this is for any kind of pain or suffering. This aspiration on behalf of all beings, I find a very powerful way to do this is so simple, and it helps jump you out of the blindness of suffering. I place my hands in this position, as we do when we're making a salutation or a prayer, and then I open them out like this and create a tray like this, and offering my suffering for the release of suffering from others. That others be relieved, I offer mine. And I accompany it with a simple statement, may mine be sufficient. I really commend to you this practice. It's so simple and it's so graceful. Just like this, and then like this. May mine be sufficient. May no one else, no other being, ever have to suffer this. May mine be sufficient. Do you think you would like to try that? Let's do that together. Whatever suffering we're aware of, or in whatever confusion we have, know that others have it worse and more profound and more all-encompassing and more enduringly than we, and in countless lifetimes, in countless worlds, countless circumstances in this very lifetime, in this very world. So think of what gives you the most pain right now in this lifetime. What is the worst pain that you are aware of in your life? Mental, physical, spiritual, emotional. If you start to cry, that's fine too. Yes? Then greet all sentient beings, and greet the sublime ones on whom we have some reliance. Yes? Make it a tray. Place your suffering on the tray and lift it. I offer my suffering for the release from suffering of all beings. May all beings be freed. May mine be sufficient. You can feel that having an effect right there, yes? Yeah. The altruistic paradox. The more one devotes oneself to the happiness of others, the happier one becomes. And that's an example of what is meant by this teaching, that as you love more, as you have greater compassion for others, your self-grasping diminishes. That's freedom. That's freedom. With every iota less of self-grasping, there's a world more of freedom and joy for us. I don't know what the metric is, but that's the dynamic. Doesn't it make you happy? Yes? Tears. Tears flow. This is such a tender, generous impulse of the mind that we school ourselves to. You know, we've been trained to think differently than this. You know, but there may even come a time, this lifetime or another, on the Bodhisattva path, where you will rejoice in the occasion for your suffering, because it is the occasion for your generating bodhicitta. This is when harm becomes a precious treasure. The moment of harm for you is the moment of your freedom from self-grasping. Because in that moment, when you experience harm or its potential or its effects, you are really aspiring, supplicating, intending that by your suffering, others are freed. That's bodhicitta. May mine be sufficient. Please remember this. Because today, tomorrow, or sometime in your life before you leave, you will experience suffering again. It may be unbearable. May mine be sufficient. And no one can do this for you. No one can effectively take my suffering and offer it for the benefit of others. I have to do that. And fortunately, as with patience, there are many occasions that life gives us in which we do experience suffering. So we practice first at the level we can. Remember we talked about training gently in the Bodhisattva's training. We've spoken particularly of the paramita practices, these perfection practices that we're looking at right now. It takes time, patience, endurance, and aspiration to weather our own storms. And over time, we develop the capacity to offer ourselves in the exchange of Tonglen. This is an example of that exchange, actually. The essence practice of may mind be sufficient is a Tonglen commitment. So here's where personally, as a practitioner like you, I have found it over time to be very helpful to have the language available to turn to and to articulate through without necessarily thinking up my own way of saying it. There's a formula available that I can apply, which turns my mind. May mind be sufficient is one of those. That turns our mind from self-preoccupation and self-cherishing, self-grasping, to the generosity, the ultimate generosity of mind for you. Mind for you. Yeah? So please remember this. May mind be sufficient. People have made a lot of money off of Post-its, but they never imagined that they could be part of the spiritual regalia and ritual implement. The ritual implement of the Post-it, I want to highly recommend. May mind be sufficient can go up on your mirror or your wall, along with some of these other things that somebody reminded me the other day. Is this week 2? What week are we in? Of having heard in the teachings, and I only remembered it after she had showed it to me, of it is more important to love than to live. Well, that could go on a Post-it. She has it on a Post-it. And sometimes I place a Post-it right here, so that when I happen upon a mirror, I'm not seeing this old thing that I'm used to and that I, can get caught in. I'm seeing this. Right on my wisdom eye. May mind be sufficient, or I love you anyway, or whatever it is I need to remember that day. So, by all means, embrace the Post-it as a efficacious spiritual implement. You can choose your color. You can color code the 37 Bodhisattva practices and have fun. So, I feel pretty much done for the day with this aspect of the teaching. I want to finish the paramitas tomorrow morning. Let me just finish with diligence. Let me diligently get to the end of diligence here. Again, the categorization capacity of the Buddhist tradition is just wonderful. So we speak of armor-like diligence. Diligence that functions like armor for us. And we speak of the diligence of application. That we diligently apply what we have and what we know. Not sporadically, but diligently, with joyous effort. And then insatiable joyous effort, insatiable diligence. We can't get enough of doing what we can, even though it will never be enough. And in that spirit, it's always enough. Does that make sense? Yeah. We can't get enough. I remember a friend of mine saying this at one point. We were on retreat together, and it was the first Mindro retreat I had ever done. The practices of the basic series of practices in the Tibetan tradition that some teachers ask our students to do. And I was wanting to eat potato chips after a day of practice. I was in the prostrations. I was just hungry all the time. And so I wanted to take a break. And I went to her room and I said, well, let's go get a pizza and, go out to dinner or something. And she said, I can't get enough of Dharma. You go eat for me. But you know what my reaction was? I was mortified and angry. I hadn't yet gotten enough of Dharma to understand the significance of that kind of insatiable, joyful effort. I just was really embarrassed that I didn't have really hardly any. But it has grown. I'm now quite insatiable. But I still sometimes go for the pizza. These things are not mutually contradictory, right? We're in the world. The Bodhisattva is not withdrawing from the world. The Bodhisattva is engaging ever more deeply with the world and with beings. It's just not in the same way. Not getting hooked and not hooking. It's engaging with freedom for the freedom of all. But it's not, if you withdraw from the world, you're withdrawing from beings. We don't even withdraw from suffering. Because if you withdraw from suffering or you recoil from suffering, you try to put yourself away from suffering, you're abandoning beings. Because beings are suffering. So if you try to get away from the suffering, you're also trying to get away from the beings who are experiencing it. Yes? Instead, we abandon the causes of suffering. And they're in our minds, not in the other people's minds. I mean, they may also be there, but that's not where we're working. We're working with our minds. And it's because we work with our own minds to uproot the seeds of suffering that we have laid down karmically, and to work really diligently and with clarity with the outflows of our karmic causes that we've set. The experiences and appearances of our life are those outflows. I can't remember the end of that sentence. You can make one up if you want. So it'll be like pin the tail on the donkey. Which ending is the best for that particular beginning sentence? Truly, I have no memory of it. So that's what I want to offer about joyful effort. And tomorrow we'll do verses 29 and 30 of the text, the last two of the 6 perfection practices. We'll do those in the morning. Okay? And but now, let's take a look at any questions that people might have. Because we have about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, so we can do some questions. I have a couple here written down. One I responded to, right? Of the eyes closed question, and then there's a couple of others here. One I didn't understand well enough to respond to it right now, but I will try to get to it tomorrow. Here's the question. What is the antidote to afflictive habitual tendencies that one has had since very early childhood, and probably in lifetimes before this, that are so horrible they are obstructing one's progress in their practice. That's a really important question, because sometimes we can feel caught and unable to penetrate the web of confusion or suffering, to see how to even work with it. Sometimes we're really just caught like that, like a spider in a web of our own weaving. The Dharma, and particularly this Tibetan tradition, has limitless skillful means that function as antidotes for our afflictive emotions and our confusion. And the common element to all of these skillful means is the motivation. The motivation to liberate oneself from suffering is very powerful, but very limited until it includes the motivation to liberate all beings from suffering. And so our own afflictive emotions and obstructions are the very material by which we accomplish the deepening and expansion of our motivation, so that it becomes truly the Bodhisattva motivation that lifts us immediately. It begins the process of lifting us from the morass we're caught in. On the basis of everything we've been talking about, you understand completely what I've just said, I'm sure, because we're talking about how to lessen our self-grasping. And one of the things we know, because that is what our self-grasping becoming less means, our love and compassion for others becomes more, and vice versa. Our love and compassion for others becoming greater, our self-grasping decreases. This is a reciprocal dynamic. We know from the experience of even the pebble in the shoe that pain tightens our perceptual framework. It tightens our perceptual scope. It brings us to the pinpoint of self. Pain concentrates our attention on self. And that's true for physical pain, mental pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain. We tend to react with contraction, and that contraction is into self-absorption and self-concern and self-cherishing, usually. That's why this practice is so profound and powerful immediately, because you're taking the self-contraction and expanding it in love for all. Immediately you're lifted. So when we're thinking about habitual tendencies and afflictions from childhood and prior lifetimes, I mean, we all have this. This goes with the territory of being a sentient being. This is not unique or special in any way, although the circumstances may be unique, to your situation. But the antidote to apply always is the aspiration of the Bodhisattva, that all beings be free from the suffering and confusion and self-absorption that you find yourself caught in. So, though we say, and the Dharma says there is no universal medicine for the illness of suffering, there is a universal medicine, which is bodhicitta. The instant you apply the bodhicitta band-aid, the bleeding heart of self-concern is somewhat stanched. Don't ask me where that came from. My own experience, actually, is where it comes from. The self-absorption is increased by the suffering unless you offer the suffering for others. It's what we've just been looking at in this practice, yes? So that is the antidote of choice. For specific kinds of suffering, there may be specific antidotes of practice. For example, if you have the suffering of great anger and hatred in your system, and that's a kind of default position that you just take when confronted with stress or pain or anything, or any sentient being, Bodhisattva practice is, he's Mr. Clean. Remember Mr. Clean? Yeah, that's Bodhisattva. He cleanses the mental continuum. That practice cleanses the mental continuum, purifies the mental continuum of the seeds of anger and hatred. For lack of compassion, we have Chenrezig and Tara. They're extremely good friends. You can do either practice. Chenrezig and Tara are both Buddhas of compassion. For poverty, we have generosity. For sorrow, we have rejoicing and gratitude. So there are specific antidotal practices, and some of them are just as simple as a way of articulating the intention to give one's own distress or confusion for the benefit of others. It may not be a deity practice. It might be a mantra that comes to you from your teacher or from your own experience or from something that you encounter, a mantra that has transformational power for you. I always thought affirmations were really offensive because back in the old days, now I find them very affirmative, actually. The affirmative character of affirmations took me by surprise. But I didn't know then that by voicing the opposite of what you think you are and aspiring to that, you're actually transforming the pathways of your own intention and capacity. I didn't know that. But I was very, very sick at one point. A spiritual illness, not a physical illness, but it was taking my life. And, I was apparently dying. And I was having a great time, I have to tell you, because that was when I discovered the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The specific translation by Francesca Fremantle and Chogyam Trungpa. This is the book about the instructions for the dangerous pathway of the bardo, the interval between death and rebirth. But it's an entire life pathway. It's not just for that bardo, it's for your entire life. And it's actually teachings on the nature of mind and how to realize them. But since I was dying, I thought I should maybe pick up this book, and so I did. I had no idea what, I was not a student of Tibetan Buddha Dharma at the time, but I started reading this book. And it saved my mind. I don't know whether it saved my life or not, but it definitely saved my mind. But out of my dying, what appeared to be a dying process, and my study, I found a mantra arose in my mind. It was so simple and so profound and so vastly powerful that I really credit that mantra with shifting something in my mental pathways to understand the relationship of truth, mind, body, and the articulation through the systems of the mind and body of words of truth. How words of truth articulating through the entire system banish false belief, false holding of thought and belief. Actually banish them, or we could say transmute them. The mantra was simply this: you might need it someday, and I offer it freely, not copyrighted. I am healthy, I am whole, I am holy. I am healthy, I am whole, I am holy. And it operates on the dimensions of body, psyche, and mind itself. And the three words, healthy, whole, and holy, they all come from the Norwegian word hal, which means wholeness and holiness, same thing. So it's really an articulation of the Absolute as it appears at different levels and systems of the relative. And somehow dimly I sense that, and it works in that way. Sort of amazing that, thunder, wonderful. But it's amazing that our minds, when we need something, can find it in the recesses of our knowing, of our inseparable, and that we are inseparable from truth. We know this. Tim and I were just talking about this a while ago. We know this, that we're inseparable from truth, or we would not long for truth. We know that we're inseparable from love, or we would not long for love. We don't long for that which we've never heard of. And we can't resonate to that which we haven't already in our system. System is a great word. It's the whole thing, you know. So to articulate the Absolute is to strengthen our relationship with it, our knowing of our relationship with it. We're inseparable. We are a blend of Absolute and relative. At all times, we're a blend. Absolute and relative we are both. We are that. Because Absolute and relative are of the same nature. See, we always come back to the same thing. Oh, she's so repetitious, that person. The Dharma is repetitious. The Dharma keeps telling us the same thing in many, many, many different kinds of ways, because there are 84,000 different kinds of minds. I asked one of my lamas once, well, have somebody counted? I mean, what do you mean 84,000? He said, that's a way of saying many, many. And he also, about patience, he said, slowly by slowly, we make progress in the Dharma. I love that, slowly by slowly. So, I hope that if the person who wrote this question to me is here now, I express the hope that perhaps your question was addressed in a way that was useful for you and useful for us all. You don't need to identify yourself. I save these because there may be another book on the way in which perhaps these questions might be found. Because the questions are so wise, you know? Wouldn't that be fun? Find yourself in the pages of a book. Oh, my question, look, she wrote a whole page pointing out the wisdom in my apparent ignorance, which I'm happy to be able to do. So give me your ignorance so I can point out the wisdom inherent in it. Right? And there's plenty of time for all of that. I love this way of being with friends who are practitioners together, being in Sangha like this and having a deep conversation over a period of a couple of days in a space of this kind, this sacred space. But anytime we come together with this kind of intention, the space is sacred. In fact, Really, I think everything is sacred or nothing is. So, all good. That's Samantabhadra. That's Kuntu Zangpo. One path, two fruitions. Or one ground, two paths. And then you can say also one path, two fruitions. So, we're done for today. Yes? Are you willing to get up and move, or do you want to sit for a while longer? We're coming back at 7. Would some of you come tonight for our silent sitting practice at 7? Yeah? Good. It was marvelous last night when we chanted together the Kunju Zampo. It was really marvelous. But I experienced with you this morning something of power in the way you sit. And I mean sit. I use the word sit instead of meditate or contemplate. Sit, just do nothing, just sit. I experienced the power of doing that together, that not doing thing we're doing together. I experienced the power of that together, and I would love to have us have another occasion today for sitting in that same way of cultivating the inward attention, but without the gonging, just cultivating that inward attention, and then when you realize that you've lost it for a moment, you just take a break like that and then come back again and cultivate the inward attention with the intention that you and all beings see the true nature directly and realize the inseparability of truth and love and you. So it's a special invitation to do more of what I found we were well occupied doing this morning. So that's the hook. That's my hook. I'm putting the hook out there. Okay? Good. See you at 7. You're welcome. Thank you. Let's, we'll do the dedication of merit after the practice tonight. We don't need to do it now. Okay? And remember that we're still in silence. Necessary speech, of course, is fine.